Here we are at the Robert Frazier Trail. This is something new this year. Last year they put this in, and there's a high school field, and the high school and the old junior high, and then the library's down that road. One reason I'm showing this is that this is pretty much, a lot of this trail is handicap accessible. You could, there's a short piece on the other side of this road that you could do with a wheelchair. And this part also, we're going to follow this down. There's a bridge at one point, so we'll have to look at that and see if that's handicap able. Here's a little map of where we're going. But we're going to, we're right here. We're just going to go down to here, past the Turan Road. That's where my wife is parked reading. But you can go this leg too. But basically, once you go past this point, a little ways in here, you could probably still use a wheelchair, but you couldn't down along the rest of this trail. This is one of the spots I look for mushrooms. You know, it's not really well shaded yet. The leaves haven't come in on, there's a lot of beech trees here and birch trees. And so my theory is that the ground would warm up first here. So this is, to me, is like an indicator trail. In other words, if I see mushrooms here, I'm probably going to find them other places, because a lot of the other trails and things I go on are much more sheltered, and the ground would tend to be cooler. And generally, the soil has to be actually hit 50 degrees and be that way for a few days before mushrooms decide that they're going to send up their fruiting body. Now, the main part of the mushroom actually is underground. It's a bunch of thread-like structure called mycelium. And you can think of the mushroom that comes up on top much the same as an apple on an apple tree. That produces that, you know, the thing we call a mushroom, to disperse the spores. So of course, if it goes up when it's too cold, that mushroom could die. If there's not enough humidity, that mushroom could die. So the plant is, it's not a plant, sorry, the fungus is geared toward only producing the fruiting body in the right conditions. So we should be seeing them soon. Very soon, we hope. I've seen deer on this trail before. I saw 2 of them, believe it or not, down this other way one time. They were kind of in a place where was a little thicker amount of woods, but one year I was parked at the library, Baxter Library, and deer, and it's a doe, okay, and it's small, what do you call small deer? But anyway, you know, you gotta get mama and child deer were right there next to the car almost with me. They were looking around. I said something when I went in the library, and they said that many other people had seen them too, so they were relatively unafraid of the presence of people. Which, for them, could be a bad thing in the long run. This greenery here is called false lily of the valleys. They'll put up a little flower stalk with a couple flowers on it later on. You can see here quite a big flooded area. There's usually some water here, but not as much as this. We've had a lot of rain. And, you know, when soil is wet, then it dries and it's warm. that triggers a lot of mushrooms too. They usually call it flush. They send forth these fruiting bodies. And of course, if you're foraging for edible mushrooms, that can be real good news. We're supposed to have some warmer weather this week, so it could be that we'll find some edible mushrooms again. Now, the ones that actually grow on dead logs and things like that, they don't seem to be, well, they're not as dependent on the soil temperature, of course, but it's the temperature of the, wood that they're growing on. Now, here's a wild edible. This is knotweed, and when it's small like this, it's edible. It has a taste of rhubarb, mild rhubarb. Now down south they have a different variety that's much thicker, and so you get substantially more when you harvest them. You have to peel them and stuff like this. So with ours, you haven't got a lot of things left to eat, where down south, I guess, they have some that is quite a bit more volume to the stems, even while they're short. And they have even knotweed festivals where people make all these things to eat. But I think knotweed pie, and using the recipe for a rhubarb pie, less some of the sugar, would really taste nice. The only trouble too is harvesting it. This would probably be okay here along a trail, but on roadsides they've been sprayed and different things. You probably don't want to pick it along a roadside. Hi, how you doing?
Good, and you?
Good. But there's an area here on the edge that's, I guess I went back by it over there, but huge patch of knotweed. So that would probably be safe to harvest from, because I would very much doubt that any chemicals would have been applied on this trail. But, and of course the roadsides, you have leaded gasoline and things that have gotten into the soil. That's why most foraging books I've say that you want to be 200 feet from a road, thinking that whatever that soil contamination is like, or whatever, that it would decrease to a negligible level after 200 feet. We had a lot of old trees breaking down this winter. We had a lot of wind. We didn't have tons of snow, but we had a lot of wind. And sometimes it's a cumulative effect. After so many high winds several times, and they can give way when there isn't so much wind. And then the weight of the snow and things like that too. But like I say, we didn't have huge amounts of snow this year. We had huge amounts of water though this spring. So hopefully we'll start seeing some edible mushrooms coming up. This is also an area that will have quite a few Indian pipes or ghost pipes. They're trying to change the name, with political correctness. They used to be called, when I was a kid, Indian peace pipes. And now they kind of unofficially started calling it ghost pipes, but that, isn't what it's been called for so many years. So it can be confusing for some people. But they're a plant with no chlorophyll. So they can't produce food. They can't produce food for themselves. So they kind of steal it from this mycelium I'm talking about. Rossella is a certain family of mushrooms, and that's what they steal the nutrients from. And the Rossella mushrooms live in a beneficial association with the trees, certain broadleaf trees like beech. And so in an area like this, you can see a lot of the Indian pipes, but it is good to note that they can't grow in an area that doesn't have these Rossella mycelium under the ground. Now, you may not see the fruiting bodies of the mushroom come up with, the fungus with that thing we call a mushroom, but they can't live without it. So they're there somewhere. Maybe they're waiting to fruit, or they've already fruited, and you just missed it. We can see our ferns are starting to unfurl here. I haven't seen ostrich ferns, which are the edible fern. I tried them before, and they're not that sensational. It's funny how that people, to me, brag about the taste of certain wild edibles, and they're really not that good. A lot of wild edibles, look at all the water over here, that's usually more dry. A lot of wild edibles are quite bitter. Well, this is interesting. My wife is going to meet me over here, and she hasn't made it. Oh, there she is. Good, there's the car. But I'm going to walk past there. I want to see if our Jack in the Pulpits have started growing over here on this other side of the trail. Usually there's not as much standing water here either. In this area, just to note, I found a couple of years in a row what appears to be puffballs, but they're really what they call earth stars, which basically look almost identical, but they have a dark center and they're poisonous. So even with something like puffballs, where they say, oh, you can eat any kind of puffball, yeah, except the ones that you can't, or the ones that look like this, and somehow they classified them as something else. Here are some more of these yellow flowers here. It's kind of dandelion looking. That's coltsfoot. It does the flowers first, and then it sends up the leaves later, and the leaves store the energy for the next year when they repeat the process. I assume that's done to have less things to compete with for pollination. If you see right in the center here, that kind of brown stalk, that's a spore stalk of horsetail. Now, again, something similar to the coltsfoot, but these are spore-bearing plants. They put up this thing first. It does its thing, and then all these little leafy, not leafy really, but green kind of things that are coming up, that's the rest of the horsetail. That's what, again, is going to has all the chlorophyll in it. It's going to capture all the energy and put it in the roots, so it can send up its spore stalks in the next year. I'll just see if I can see an explanation for that, what they think, but to me, I'm thinking it produces competition. You can still see we're in a, pretty much a handicap accessible area. And part of why this is done, I think, is not so much for people with wheelchair, but people with bikes. There's a lot of bikes on these trails. Oh, look at all the, you can see all the coltsfoot, all the yellow flowers. None of their leaves have come up yet, but you can see all the horsetails coming up. And the horsetails will branch out, get taller. They don't really have what we would call a leaf, not a true leaf, But they have a high degree of silica, and people would even use the plants as scrub brushes to clean dishes with. So that's pretty bizarre, huh? Hi. And as you see, there's a lot of people that jog on this route too. I just kind of take it slow. And thank you. And there's the bikes I was talking about. And this is a Saturday. Normally, if I was here, usually I'm on this trail during the weekday, and I'm usually the only one on it. But Saturdays is when there's a lot of activity. Now, in this area, which I don't see any of, this is where Jack in the Pulpits come up. There's another area right over here. They like wet soil. And here's one area where there's a bunch of plants that will come up too, and you can see that this has actually got some standing water in it now. But there's no sign of their characteristic leaf. And of course later in the season they'll have the very unusual flower for which the plant is named. The word jack in plants refers to, oh wait a second, look at this. Here's some of the horsetail that's already hit the point of broadcasting seeds. Here we go, we're in a more controlled lighting area here. But you can see, similar to dandelions, it's funny, it's yellow like a dandelion, and it disperses the seeds in the same way. It's funny, I've been fooling around with the artificial intelligence programs, and there's this one called Bing that I'm enjoying using. Yeah, but I was in another one, the chat. I'll have to post the name below, but you can do 3 a day for free, and I guess if you pay the $40 a month, you can get the more professional version. Supposedly that's supposed to be more accurate in different things, but you know, I was just proposing to it some things about thermodynamics and the origin of the universe. And the idea is that things tend to run in such a degree as entropy is increased, which means disordered. Things move towards a disordered state. And usually if you act on a system randomly, and it will go to that random state, and once it's in that random state, it will never go out of the random state. It's just doesn't happen. You know, it looks good on paper, but it doesn't. I've given the example before of a deck of cards. You buy a deck of cards and you shuffle it. How many times would you have to shuffle it before it would actually go back into order? Well, I would say never, even though, you know, at least thinking, you would think that's possible. You know, given an infinite number of time, all chances would present themselves, but that's not really how order and disorder works. And so I was saying, asking this thing, well, how can blah, blah, blah be? And it said, well, basically you have to have an intelligence behind it to bring an unordered system into order. You know, so what's that intelligent system? Of course, I would call that God. That's why I think evolution is purposeful. In other words, evolution continued to go on, and organisms became increasingly complex going quite differently than this flow of thermodynamics would say that things would devolve into their most disordered state. But life does the opposite, and evolution does the opposite. It gets more and more complicated. So just some interesting things to think about. Oh, here's a bridge. Yeah, this would still be wheelchair navigable, I think. Widen out my view a little so you can see it. Yeah, this area here is wet all the time, so as to not destroy the rest of the trail or the area, they've built up this nice area. And you could say these last 2 years they've been doing it, so there's some of the lumber still laying here. Of course, they'll take that and move it all. You can see this was it once quite a while ago, not when I ever walked on it, but at one time those logs just provided the way to cross the wet area. Now, talking about some bizarre things, someone was mentioning how, you can, oh, this looks like, I don't think I'd want to be on a wheelchair going down there. Maybe you could. That looks kind of steep. Probably could do it. My wife wouldn't enjoy it though. See, and here we're getting into areas that are, more wet, more roots, and things where wheelchairs could get stuck. But, so anyway, nice little trail. I'm seeing the things that I expect to see coming up. Here's a plant. I'm not going to dig it up because I'm not supposed to dig up things here, but well, we'll talk about it later when it goes into more bloom. We have Indian cucumbers. We have a plant that produces a really small edible root. So it's like to eat the plant, you have to kill it because you have to pull it up. And each plant only has, like I say, the size of a pencil eraser maybe for a root. So you'd have to take an awful lot of them to try to survive. Now, obviously, if you were somewhere stranded, that was your only food option, it would be great, but you'd have to harvest so many of them. But there are areas where I've seen hundreds of plants in one area, so it could be possible. But the whole idea of people thinking, we have the people, the prepper people or the survivalist people, and they're learning plants and things, and with the idea that they can survive in the wild with this plant knowledge. And actually, that's probably not true. Because this is in the case of society breaks down. Because in case of society breaking down, everybody's going to be looking for those, and the forests are just going to be ripped apart by people looking for something to eat. And except for remote areas, there just won't be anything. And some of the best books on foraging are written by Samuel Thayer. I think I've got all of his books, but in one of the books he talks about this. And okay, so here you have someone who's a professional person, written 3 books about plants, edible plants, how to collect them, how to eat them. Oh, look at this here. You can see a big stand of the spore heads for the let me come into it, of the horsetail. So he's a professional, right? So he decides to do an experiment. So for so long he's going to eat only what he's collected, and he's got food too that he's allowing himself to use some of the other food they have that they've canned or jarred, and some of that's meat, from hunting or whatever. But basically, he and his wife It takes him 4 hours every day to get up enough food to feed them. That's quite a bit. So you're figuring, you know, usually 8-hour day, work day, you're spending 4 hours just trying to get enough to eat. And if there were other people looking, it would take a lot longer. But just the idea of somehow thinking that you're going to survive on plants alone, or even animals in the woods, is kind of not that viable, because of course, you know, as society has spread more, we've displaced so many animals that there's no habitat for them. So, you know, the number of fish and game there would have been when only the Native Americans were here. Of course, there were a lot fewer of them, but there was more game, more area for the game to live. Now, what we're seeing in Maine is kind of interesting in that the forest cover in Maine is increasing. It's not decreasing. And why is that? Well, farms have gone out of business. You know, people who farm, whether they were dairy cows or you know, just, you know, agriculture is basically almost disappearing from the Maine landscape. And what that means is those fields fill in with trees. And we're seeing more wildlife now in around our houses because there's more unbroken paths of woods that these animals can travel in. So you're much more likely to see some classical, you know, wild animal here now than you would have been 25 years ago. There's been a bear that's been in the area around, you know, not technically on my street, but, you know, in the general area of Gorham. What is that? Oh, motorcycles. I can see them off in the distance. So this added tree cover. Oh, there's something. Oh, that's just a fern that's coming up. There's more animals in contact with people in Maine. Also, as that's happened, okay, some of the hunting ground for birds of prey have been covered up, so it's hard for them to see game. So they're hunting more on the roads. And what does that mean? Well, we see them more often, but 60%, I've read the statistic, is 60% of injuries that birds of prey sustain is from automobiles, because they're on the roads and people, you know, they don't try to, but they do hit them. We had a bizarre case a couple of years ago where a man on a motorcycle died because evidently he was driving and this turkey vulture was flying at the same time across the road, hit the guy in the head, and that was enough to knock him off the motorcycle, you know, and he died. So, what a bizarre thing, but, you know, we see a lot more birds of prey. And that's generally considered, it's two things. We've got this forest cover, so there's more animals, but then we've got it concentrated more on the road, so we have two reasons why we would see more birds of prey. In my area, you might see 7 turkey vultures at one time without too much problem at all. And like I say, in our area, there's been a bear. We had a moose, a younger moose in our front yard once, but that was a lot of years ago. Well, here we are. Well, I hope you enjoyed my jibber jabbering. Have a good one. Take a walk.